Welcome to this program in the Our Finger Lakes History series. I am Seneca County historian Walter Gable. This program deals with the Pre-Emption Line that divided the Indian lands rights in western New York state that were awarded to Massachusetts from the lands of New York state. You will note in this map that there are actually two different colored lines. That is because there actually were two different surveys done to establish this Pre-Emption Line, as you will learn in this program. As a result of the French and Indian War, France gave up control of its French possessions in North America to Britain. On this map, those French lands are shown in the light green shading. Britain had won the French and Indian War, but Britain was in financial difficulties, perhaps even serious financial difficulties. As the wording in the right-hand portion of this map indicates, Britain didn't want to get involved in costly wars with the Indians in the area shown in light green on this map. So British King George III issued the Proclamation of 1763, forbidding the settlers in the American colonies, shown in the dark green area, from moving west of the Appalachian Mountains into the Indian territories, shown in light green. Residents of the seaboard colonies, however, were not happy with this restriction. The situation became worse after the end of the American Revolutionary War. With the Treaty of Paris ending the American Revolution, Britain gave the United States all lands east of the Mississippi River. This provision had been agreed to by the British without consulting the Indian tribes in this area. So the big question is, would these Indians allow white settlers in this area? This concession of all of that territory, it meant that the U.S. had a greatly expanded border compared to the well-settled coastal areas of the former 13 colonies. There was another complication. When the kings of England, James I, Charles I, Charles II, had granted charters to the various royal colonies, these royal charters created conflicts over what specific area. This was largely because the charters were made without good knowledge of the actual boundaries of these chartered colonies. If you look at this map carefully, you see that the now independent state of Massachusetts was claiming virtually all of what is today western New York, and Connecticut was claiming much of present Pennsylvania. Clearly, the state of New York didn't want Massachusetts to have control over most of present New York State. There were several conflicting land claims among the states, but I'm dealing here only with the one affecting western New York. Both Massachusetts and New York claimed their colonial charters gave them most of western New York. At Hartford, Connecticut in 1786, the states of Massachusetts and New York agreed to a Treaty of Hartford. So it is not confused with two previous treaties of Hartford. This new treaty needs to be called the Treaty of Hartford of 1786. In this Treaty of Hartford of 1786, the state of Massachusetts gave up its claims to sovereignty over any part of western New York. These were Iroquois Indian-controlled and occupied lands. In return for giving up claim to sovereignty, Massachusetts was given the preemptive right to negotiate with the Iroquois to purchase these lands west of Seneca Lake. Preemption, therefore, basically means that Massachusetts had the first rights to negotiate with the Indians for these lands west of Seneca Lake. The key provision for our program is that it was agreed that a survey would be done to establish clearly the boundary where Massachusetts' preemptive rights began. There had been talk that the lands in which Massachusetts had preemptive rights were lands west of Seneca Lake. The reality is that Seneca Lake doesn't extend from Lake Ontario to the Pennsylvania border. The Treaty of Hartford of 1786 said that the survey would begin at the New York-Pennsylvania border at the 82nd milestone west of the north bank of the Delaware River at the 42nd parallel of north latitude, and then proceed north all the way to Lake Ontario. The surveying of this preemption line began at the Pennsylvania border at that 82nd milestone, and then proceeded north to Lake Ontario. The survey work was headed by Colonel Hugh Maxwell, with William Jenkins and some other assistants. As the survey map shows here, the survey line at the north end of Seneca Lake was a good 2 miles to the west, which would be at the very bottom of the map shown, so that Geneva was basically located very near the Indian settlement of Canandaigua, but all of present Geneva was east of the preemption line and thus in New York. As the lands west of the preemption line were being sold by the state of Massachusetts, it became suspected that the preemption line had been incorrectly surveyed, that it should have run closer to Seneca Lake at the north end of that lake. Obviously, the suspicions of error easily led to allegations of fraud. One allegation was that the members of the land company competing with the Phelps and Gorham Land Company that purchased the lands from Massachusetts wanted the survey team to skew the results so that Geneva would not be part of the lands of the Phelps and Gorham Land Company. There were suggestions that the competing land company got the surveyors drunk, and then the surveyors made surveying errors while they were drunk. Adding to this speculation of deliberate fraud was the fact that Colonel Maxwell, the chief surveyor, had left the surveying party on August 7th near the Keuka outlet at Dresden to go to Geneva to get supplies. He planned to be gone only overnight, but he was actually detained, as the word was used, in Geneva an extra 3 days. There were initial allegations that the error in the surveying was done while he was in Geneva. Had the competing land company been responsible for detaining Maxwell in Geneva? That allegation of fraud mentioned in that previous frame existed for many years. However, many years later, the actual book of survey notes that Colonel Maxwell meticulously kept was discovered. And from Maxwell's survey book, 2 pages of which are shown here, we now know that no surveying took place while Maxwell was detained those extra days in Geneva. So because Maxwell had a reputation of such high character, no historian was willing to speculate that Maxwell would be part of any deliberate fraud. But his survey notebook didn't provide an answer to the question, why was he detained those extra days in Geneva? The error in Maxwell's survey is most widely explained today by the fact that he did the survey line using magnetic north rather than true north. Using a compass in 1788, Maxwell should have needed to make an adjustment of about 2 degrees to the east for the survey line he was making. We also know that the survey error began almost immediately when he started the survey work on the New York-Pennsylvania border, so that it just became an ever greater discrepancy to the west as he proceeded north. In other words, the allegation that the surveying error began at the Keuka outlet area near Dresden on Seneca Lake as some kind of fraud is just a mistaken suspicion. So to deal with the suspicion that the original survey line was skewed to the west, a second survey was done in 1792. This second survey made use of a new surveying instrument, a high-precision German-made transit. Using the transit, this second survey line followed true north, not magnetic north. If you look at the map, you will see how the second survey line, shown in green, goes through the northern part of Seneca Lake and is east of the original survey line, which is shown in red. The difference starts at the New York-Pennsylvania border, and it's even more of a deviation to the east by the time the line is at the south shore of Lake Ontario, shown at the very top of the map. In this map, you see how the survey lines proceed north through present Wayne County. The distance between the first survey line and the new preemption line grows ever greater as you proceed north toward Lake Ontario. The area between the first survey or old preemption line and the second or new preemption line is known as the Gore. It consisted of about 85,000 acres. Gore is a dressmaking term for a wedge or pie-shaped piece of material. So as we get today, we have a preemption road on the west edge of the city of Geneva and a preemption street at the boundary between Ontario County and Seneca County. I keep the names road and street when it comes to Preemption Road and Preemption Street separate by remembering that both street and Seneca begin with an S, and that Preemption Road is closer to Rochester than is the Preemption Street. So that's how I remember the difference. So the lands east of the finalized preemption line were New York State. At the time of the surveying of the preemption line, what is today's Seneca County was part of Montgomery County, which was renamed Herkimer County in 1791. Much of what was Montgomery County in 1792 became the new military tract, which is a topic I will cover in another program in our Finger Lakes History series. In summary, the state of Massachusetts had preemption rights to Indian lands west of the preemption line. This meant that Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, could negotiate with the Indians living there to buy those lands for white settlers to then move into and settle. In our subsequent program in this Our Finger Lakes History series, I will deal with the various land holdings in this Massachusetts preemption area west of that preemption line. A real significance of the preemption line story, I think, is that the states of Massachusetts and New York were able to resolve their disputed land claims and even the exact boundary, all peaceably, without resulting to actual fighting or war. The initial surveying of the preemption line was an error, leading to allegations of fraud. But even this error was resolved without resulting to fighting. A second preemption line was more correctly surveyed. I hope that you have enjoyed learning more about the preemption line, which is another part of our Finger Lakes history.